Alert from calendar, Scout meeting Class A. Alert from H2R Graphics. Please check your YouTube API key.
Welcome, everyone, to this Professional Development Hour presentation brought to you proudly by the Atlanta Metro chapter of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. This presentation is brought to you tonight live from Wild Wings Cafe in Dunwoody, Georgia. Before we begin, we'd like to let you know that any opinions presented tonight are solely the opinions of the presenter and not that of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, or any other of its affiliates. We certainly hope you will enjoy tonight's presentation, so sit back and relax, and on with the show.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Atlanta Metro chapter of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, I want to welcome you this evening to our presentation, our monthly dinner meeting, and really appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules, especially on a day like today, to come to join us. Before we get started, I got a couple of announcements. I want to let you know that the GEF, the Georgia Engineering Foundation, the award banquet is going to take place.
Anyhow,
And on Thursday, February 24th. We also have a math counts competition, and if you're not aware, the math count competition is NSPs, GSPEs, the whole organization is one of our premier events. It's going to take place, the state competition, on March 21st at Georgia Tech. We need volunteers. Please consider coming and joining us. It is a great event, and you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Today's presentation, this evening's presentation, is Municipal Engineers, Unappreciated Until There's Problems. Name of our speaker today is Eric Randall. He is City Manager of the City of Smyrna. Before I turn it over to Eric, I just want to let you know that Eric grew up in an IBM family, and if you all remember what IBM stands for, I've been moved, and he sure has been moved. He's lived up and down the East Coast. So please join me in welcoming Eric.
Thank you. Yep. And am I good here?
Yep.
Thank you kindly. Again, my name is Eric Randall. I am city engineer for the city of Smyrna. I did the job for about 6 years, left 3 years ago, and came back at the September of last year. So clearly it's something I enjoy doing. But what does a city engineer do? It's a pretty sad reality that the work we do isn't appreciated until it doesn't work. Whether it's stormwater concerns, traffic management, infrastructure integrity, or public utilities, our community expects these systems to work with minimal disruption or inconvenience, not to mention hazards to life and health. The job of the municipal engineer varies depending on how their role is defined. In some cities, they're part of community development, where they review design work, developments that come in, subdivisions and so on, or commercial buildings that come in. In other instances, in other municipalities, their job is part of the Public Works Department and deals largely with infrastructure. In more populous cities with larger organizations, you have a lot more specialization. So you're going to have one engineer whose sole job is to do maintenance on a traffic signal, and that's what he does, on signal after signal. You've got others that are specialized teams. Regardless, the municipal engineer is also responsible for, hello, sorry, let me get that door for you.
We'll be on YouTube.
There we are. The municipal engineer always handles unusual circumstances with great aplomb. We're always coordinating. A big part of our job is also to coordinate with higher level organizations. By the nature, we're in cities and towns. So we coordinate with counties and with states and with federal organizations, as well as NGOs, non-governmental organizations. But in general, across the board, we're expected to be project managers and solve problems, communicate those solutions, and administrate how we work through the different issues. But underlying all of this, what underpins is just that, the mission of a professional engineer: protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And so we bring that to the job, we bring that to the position. In the city of Smyrna, and I'm going to use the city of Smyrna as an example because that's where I have the most experience. I have, by contract, worked for the city of Ackworth and for the city of Chamblee as well on different tasks. And so that has given me a really good perspective on how each role, each municipality implements their engineers in different manners. So in the city of Smyrna, traffic engineering, development review, stormwater, construction oversight, floodplain administration, and the MS4 inspection program. MS4, if you're not familiar, is the municipal separate storm sewer system permit that we get from EPD. We own all of our stormwater infrastructure, and it is separate from sanitary sewer infrastructure. That's a whole different permit, as is water distribution. But we are required to do a whole list of things. I'll explain it better in a little bit, but there are a list of commitments we make for inspections and for maintenance and for reporting to maintain our EPD permit. Unlike some other municipalities, Smyrna Engineering does not handle water sewer. That's handled completely out of our Public Works Department. For years, the Engineers Department was a supervisory role within Public Works. In the time that my departure from Smyrna and then my return, they made that a standalone department. So rather than reporting to the department head for Public Works, I report directly to the city administrator. And now I'm responsible for the budgets as well. I never had to do that before. Most visible area that the city engineer in Smyrna handles, though, is traffic engineering. And this is traffic signal operations, corridor timing, signs and pavement markings, as well as traffic calming. I have a team of 4 that does this. I've got an assistant engineer who focuses on traffic. I've got 2 traffic signal techs that handle pretty much everything. That's within their abilities. We also have another position for a crew member that we haven't been able to fill. Nobody wants to get started in this, but that's okay. Again, with signal maintenance, outages, sign creation and installation. When things exceed their abilities, we hire a lot of contract work. So we have a bucket truck that gets us up to the signal, but in the event of a traffic accident where somebody takes out one of the poles that holds up the signals, we don't have the ability in-house to reset a pole. So that's work that we contract out. And it's part of my job to make sure we have those relationships with those providers. Had one this weekend. I got a phone call that said, hey, This cabinet is consistently malfunctioning. We didn't have the ability to replace the cabinet. We hired a contractor to do it. So larger organizations have that greater depth. A city like Marietta, which also runs its power company, has the ability to set poles. They don't have to contract that work out. They just call another department. But one of the most frequent requests I get in that traffic area is for traffic calming. And it's usually in the form of the question, can you make them stop speeding on my street? I can't. If I could make anybody do anything, I wouldn't be a city engineer. I would be the king of everything. But traffic calming is usually, you'll see it most often in the form of speed humps. True traffic calming is almost an art, because what you're doing is you're influencing driver behavior without coming right out to say it, to say slow down. By narrower roads, by narrower lanes, by landscaping, you're communicating to the driver the nature of where they are driving through. You have 12-foot lanes with wide shoulders on the interstate. When a neighborhood has a 30-foot wide section of roadway with the intention of cars being able to park there, when there's no cars there, people have that same perception, I can drive faster. There's a limitation to what traffic calming can accomplish, because you have some drivers that are just intent on driving as fast as they can through a stretch of road. That's when it goes from a traffic calming solution to actually enforcement. If you're familiar, in Cobb County, on Oakdale Road, east of South Cobb Drive, north of Wright Road, this is just to the west of the West Village area, right there off of 285. They've done it right. They've got a paver solution. They've got a median down the center that's planted. They've got narrow lanes, and it instantly communicates you're in an area to go slow. Much more effectively, I think, than speed humps. So it's been a big challenge for the city of Smyrna. They have allocated resources and staff to be able to address traffic calming around the city. Next major thing I do is review development applications for both the zoning stage and the development permit stage for conformance with our ordinance. This is where my experience with development engineering. I've worked for development engineers in a site development capacity, both as the engineer of record and as a design engineer for most of my career. So I've done the design for grading, for erosion control, for stormwater management. Bringing that experience allows me to review construction drawings that are submitted for a land disturbance permit. We review site layout, grading, storm drainage, stormwater management. If there's a floodplain encroachment, we do that. We are also a local issuing authority for erosion and sediment control. That means as the city, when a developer comes in to apply, they can get comments on their erosion control plan directly from us. They don't have a separate permitting process that they have to go through the state for that. It's a big deal. But one of the biggest misconceptions about the development engineering process is we make designers do things a certain way. I am not reviewing the effectiveness of their engineering. Yes, I'm not checking math, but I'm checking to make sure it's done in accordance with our reference standards. But more particularly, I've had developers ask, why did you make the pond that big? I didn't. Your engineers submitted a design to meet our ordinance. It was their decision on how to do that. So my job is not to make it be done a certain way. I'm not getting paid to make sure that's the most efficient design or the most cost-effective design. But as long as it conforms with the Georgia Stormwater Management Manual or the Manual for Erosion and Sediment Control in Georgia, or any number of standards for local or county development standards for pavement thicknesses and so on, it meets. But it's really just that. I review based on whether or not it meets the ordinance and not whether or not it's the best design for that solution. We also interface, this is one of the areas where if you've got a project that's fronts on a state highway or that has floodplains involved. If there's jurisdictional waters from Army Corps of Engineer, I make sure that those concerns are addressed before a permit is ever issued for development. And I mentioned erosion control. That's tied directly to our MS4 responsibility. And again, MS4 is Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Operator. EPD has a permit for discharging stormwater from a municipal area. And counties or cities can be these permit holders. We create a stormwater management plan, which we affectionately refer to as the SWAMP. And the SWAMP covers 5 years. Each year we submit an annual report, and that stormwater management plan is in support of the permit that's in force. That permit is renewed by EPA and administered by EPD, who delegate it to us if we so choose. And we do. We're responsible for making sure all of our storm drainage infrastructure, our catch basins and pipes and ditches are inspected at least once every 5 years. We make sure to address illicit discharge, and we have that as part of our ordinance. So if somebody is pouring oil or paint down a storm drain, how do we address that? How do we track it? Erosion control is a big part of that. There's a very tight permit for stormwater in conjunction with construction activity. The general permits for a standalone site, a roadway project, or a common development like a subdivision. Those plans get submitted. I review them for conformance with the documents, and my inspectors on a weekly basis check every site that's active in the city. And then, as I said, each year we prepare a report documenting what we've done the previous year. And the final step is making sure that what a developer is building meets our standards. Taking their word for it doesn't cut it. I've got inspectors that go out and they're required to check pipes, check storm drains, check water services, check grading, making sure that when it gets turned over to the city or to the HOA, if it's a private development, that curbs aren't cracked, that ADA is in compliance, and things like that. But as you can see, if I'm doing my job correctly, traffic flows with little delay. We're never not going to have delay. Stormwater runoff doesn't flood. Sewers carry poo away, and the water comes out of your tap is clean and has adequate pressure. One of the disconnects, though, is that while we ensure the infrastructure meets city code, it may not be what citizens or users expect. Traffic calming is another good example of that. Can you make them slow down? Yes, I can. I can put speed humps up, so I lied earlier. I can do things that get in the way of the cars, but frequently a citizen is not asking to slow them down to the speed limit. They're saying, regardless, they're driving too fast, and I'm limited by my ordinance in what I can do. Same thing with stormwater. During a heavy storm, water's flowing in the street because the pipes don't have capacity or the inlets don't have capacity, and for an hour, water is running in the street. That's okay, because for me to put enough infrastructure in the ground that the street never inundates, those taxes go through the roof. That has to get paid for somehow. What is the reasonable design limit? And that's dictated by, again, our reference materials, Georgia Stormwater Management Manual, as well as our ordinance. One of the other misconceptions is we don't control what happens in the city. I can only advise elected officials and city administration. An example is a stop sign. When we're talking about traffic calming, a stop sign is not a traffic calming device. A stop sign serves a purpose. When you look at the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, there are specific warrants for a stop sign. Slowing cars down is not one of them. But we frequently get requests, can I put a stop sign up at this intersection because the cars are going too fast? I recommend against that. But city administration can vote and direct me to put that in. And as long as I'm not creating an imminent or apparent threat to public health and safety, it's not a good idea, but I can't say no to that because the city is the ones who make those decisions. Another thing that we do quite a bit, though, is we do advise citizens directly. The general public doesn't have a really good feel on what to do about stormwater or what they're allowed to do in a buffer. That's the most rewarding part of my job. My history, real briefly. I worked in consulting until the downturn of 2007. I was laid off in 2009. Was out of work for about 6 months, and I took a job with the U.S. Forest Service up in North Carolina. Best gig ever. I literally got paid to drive an ATV in the National Forest. Life was good. But I had a weekly commute. I was staying in a converted shed. If you've heard anything about tiny homes, they're not all they're cracked up to be. I stayed in one. It's not good. But I had a weekly commute up 575. And if you've been up that way and are you familiar with the city of Ellijay, as you're coming up 575, you see a big Chick-fil-A on the left, and there's a traffic signal, and on the right there's a Lowe's and a home and a Walmart and about 27 out parcels. And it was with kind of a sickening realization, for me, that's what I did. That was my legacy. I didn't do that project, but I did projects just like it. That was my role as a site development engineer. And then working for the Forest Service, I was in a watershed restoration project. I did work in different forest facilities, even things outside of conventional site development engineering. I designed a new observation deck. I made the water cleaner going into a stream area that was a recreation area. People bathed in this, not bathed, but people swam in this. But it received runoff directly from a parking lot. So all the stuff that drifted off cars was getting into the stream that people were sliding in, that people were playing in the water in. I was able to fix that. I was able to make that better. And when the opportunity came up for City of Smyrna, I jumped at it. I've been really happy doing municipal engineering ever since. Last thing I would say is, if you see issues you want to see addressed, tell the local engineer about that, whoever that person is. Let them know if signals aren't working right, if signs are leaning or need to get replaced. Let them know. The general public is my eyes and ears. I can't be all over. Smyrna is a 16.5 square mile city. I can't cover everything, but I have a really good network that's to address the issues that are brought to my attention. Can I answer any questions for you? Yes, sir.
These traffic signals.
Yeah. Are there really pressure sensors in the asphalt to control traffic signals?
No. What you see at intersections, and to briefly describe a traffic intersection that's signalized, you have a main line and a side street. Otherwise, without the side street, there's no point of having a signal there. The light should default to being green for the main line until somebody comes in from the side street or somebody wants to turn left. There are traffic detection elements. The ones you see most often that you see cut into the road, that's actually a loop of wire. It's an inductance loop. And the traffic control cabinet has a card that senses when that magnetic field has changed, and that says, oh, there's somebody waiting from the side street. The traffic signals are programmed based on peak hour time, and so time of day programming, based on the amount of traffic that we have going through. That determines the length of green for the main line and for the side streets to allow that traffic to merge and get the most flow through a corridor. But they are not traffic pressure sensors. You have an inductance loop. You also have cameras, and those are just detection cameras. They're not actually high-res CCTV cameras. And a new technology that I've seen coming out recently, and we've installed in Smyrna, is microwave. So you don't worry with. I prefer cameras to loops because when a loop gets cut or broken, it defaults and it's going to cut over time. Cameras are a little bit easier to deploy, but they are subject to sun and glare and fog. Microwave eliminates all of that, and we've had a lot of good results with that. Of course, microwave is the most expensive solution, so I'm working with that as well. Yes, sir.
In the local newspaper I saw, Alpharetta had an agreement when they put a road in near the Windward subdivision so that the road was over their dam. So they were partly responsible for the maintenance of that dam for the subdivision. I wondered if you encountered any kind of projects like that.
I try to avoid disproportionate responsibilities for roads because we don't have the budgets for, I guess you would call it, more esoteric locations like that. They had a reason for that, I'm certain. I don't know what that was. But they went on a road where and going across the dam. That makes sense. The advantage of public infrastructure is that anybody can use it. And so wherever possible, I want roads to be dedicated. The flip side of that is it means I'm now responsible for it. So that's where we make sure when things are going in, we're inspecting them. If there are walls, we get engineer certifications on those walls. But in Smyrna, there's nothing really that out there. But that's where you take a half step back into the zoning process. A developer comes in and he wants to bring a number of houses to the community. That enlarges the community, that increases the tax base. That's good for the city. So what is the city going to do to help encourage that? Frequently it's higher densities. In some instances it's unusual circumstances like a road across a dam. Cobb County has the covered bridge, which is a one-lane bridge, and they've got a big headache bar. In spite of having a headache bar, that headache bar gets hit. You've got overhead flashing lights before you get there that says you're over height. You've got an indicator, which is pipes hanging from a chain that indicates, and still people hit the headache bar, and they had to put the headache bar up because people were hitting the bridge. The bridge was shut down for, I think, 18 months while they rebuilt it, and they wanted that because it was a historic thing. So, what else? Sir?
You mentioned replacing a signal control cabinet.
Yes.
How standardized are those?
Very.
So if one gets hit today, you can go to the inventory and pull another one pretty quick.
Yes. When you stop and think about how a traffic signal intersection works, you've got circuits that have to go on and off at the same time. Green light in one direction is red light in another. All of those are standardized, and the cabinet is set up by phases. Phase 2 and 6 is the main lines through phase. Phase 4 and 8 is the side street. And so it's just exactly that. It's very standardized, and that's dictated by Georgia DOT here in Georgia. Other municipalities, other states have their own standards. So what you see here may be different than what you see in South Carolina. But having said that, as long as you're conforming with that standard cabinet, and I forget what the identifier is for the current standards we're using in Smyrna, and I shouldn't forget that. I just remember that we replaced NEMA cabinets. NEMA cabinets were a different standard. So they had different connectors, they had different load switches, and a traffic cabinet, when you stop and think about it, you've got the computer, which is what keeps time. You've got a series of relays and switches that are turned on and off by that controller. And it just operates on 110 voltage. So it's those relays that are controlling, and then you've got power backup and you've got an override. So if something happens that confuses the computer, like you have green lights on opposite movements, a green light on the main line at the same time as a green light on the side street, it doesn't know what to do with that and automatically goes into flash. And that's where driver instruction overrides. If you are approaching a flashing signal, you proceed through a yellow flash with caution, you stop for a red flashing signal. If it's a blank signal, if there's power's out, you treat it like a four-way stop. People don't always do that, but that's the way it's designed to work. Answer your question?
So you said NEMA?
NEMA was the standard we used to have.
NEMA 4X?
Don't know that.
IP56 now? Or?
You're talking to a civil engineer. I do know that we refer to the current cabinets as 332 cabinets. I don't recall what that standard is. That's I've been out of the traffic side of things for a while. That's why I have an assistant engineer who focuses on traffic.
Last June, there was a big news story about a building in Florida
Yes.
collapsing. And discussion about the role of the city. You care to comment?
I would have anticipated those issues during construction to be identified. Here in Smyrna, there are required inspections for footers, for walls, all through the construction process, both for site and for building. It was not, I would put it this way though, while they are responsible for ensuring that the city is or should be, and that's what I was told actually when I was in school. Last semester, we had a whole lecture series, and at that time there were 4 times as many attorneys in school as there were engineers. And we were told, that means you're going to get sued. And they're going to say things like you knew or should have known, saw or should have seen, did or should have done. Make sure you do, and make sure you document it. Most important. I would have anticipated the city should have caught that it wasn't being built according to design, to the drawings, if the drawings called for more reinforcement. It's not the city's role to determine if that design is adequate. They need to determine if it meets code, but it's the engineer of record whose job it is to determine is that design accurate. And then compounding that further that was not a surprise issue as I understand it. The homeowners association, the community management knew that there was an issue there. And I don't recall if the city was aware that there was an issue and what the potential was. Should the city have condemned the building? If they knew it and had reason to, possibly. But it was an understood issue. There were concerns about the financing of it, and it led to tragedy because there was that dithering back and forth. Move in a direction. Even if it's the wrong direction, you can change direction later on, but do something. Do something decisive. Make sure you, as a building official, to condemn the building, and this is just Eric's opinion, a building official might get a lot of flack for condemning the building. But if they didn't do that, and we had significant loss of life. So, was that the right answer? I can't say. But
how about decrepit buildings?
The city does step in when the city has, and I guess to your point, what is the city's oversight in infrastructure? That's driven by their ordinance. Has the city adopted maintenance codes? Has the city adopted building codes? With those code references as part of the ordinance, the city now has teeth to do that. And those codes reference specific issues. So yes, the city can go in on a derelict building, on an unsafe building. I had an interesting one that I was called out for, and this is one, engineer is a great word. Our fire department asked the engineer to come out to assess an apartment building after an explosion. I'm the engineer. I'm a traffic engineer. I'm not a building engineer. I'm not a structural engineer. You should talk to my structural engineering professors and they will assure you I'm not a structural engineer. But I know a little bit about what I'm looking at. And in response to them, I also wanted to get the building official out. So one of our building inspectors came out to confirm what I was observing. 3 aerosol cans, 2 of paint, 1 of WD-40. And actually there's the 4th of goof off. This is an empty 1-bedroom apartment. The maintenance man was going in, getting it ready to lease, and he was doing a little bit of punch work. And he had his cardboard box of hardware in these aerosol cans, and he set them down on the kitchen cabinet, but it turned on the kitchen counter, half on the counter, half on a burner. Didn't realize the burner was on low. This is an electric stove. Then got called away to another unit. Was out of that unit for an hour. During that time, those aerosol cans exploded. it displaced a wall by about 3 inches, to the point that shining a light up, and this is a 3-story apartment on this side. There's a 3-2 split, so 2 on the parking side, 3 on the back side. This is the middle apartment. Those 4 aerosol cans, when they let go, blew out 2 sets of sliding glass doors. There was glass shards 30 feet off the balcony. Displaced the wall, so to the point when you shined a light up, the ceiling joist, which is the floor joist for the 3rd apartment, it was displaced from the header board, and you saw about 2 inches of a nail that was tying that stuff together. There was a brief flash, but it wasn't a big explosion of fire, but it was a huge pressure release. Mind-boggling how much energy is stored in that. But again, there it comes to, yes, the city at that point had the entitlement, the right to condemn those units. You need to move, the apartment company, need to move the people out of these, find another unit, call the Red Cross. Regardless, these units cannot be occupied. Because there was something clear that they could articulate and see, this is not structurally sound. If it wasn't quite apparent, we would have hired a structural engineer to come in and do an assessment before we allowed that to go forward. But because what we saw was pretty clear, we were able to make that decision. So, what else?
That was a very interesting story. Can you give another story of a case where you had a contractor who did something wrong and what you did about it?
I can't comment based on ongoing litigation. No. That happens all the time with my site development contractors. Depending on the nature of what went wrong, if it's on a city project, or if it's on a project to be approved by the city and get a CO or get a development permit or go to a final plat, if they've done it wrong, take it out and redo it. In other instances, we advocate for citizens. So there's currently a project that has a lot of clearing to do. And understand, for erosion control, a contractor can't just come in, clear a site, then put down silt fence. Because while they're clearing the site, it's exposed. Perimeter protection has to go in first. Sediment storage has to be constructed. A construction entrance, so they're not tracking out onto the road. At that point, we inspect tree protection fence as well, and the engineer of record comes back out and looks at what's put in the field and confirms that what he designed meets field conditions and was installed per plan, or was modified based on field conditions. This starts with, in this instance, the contractor coming in and clearing just enough, taking down trees along the perimeter to get that silt fence in. As they're taking down trees, they're also grinding it up. And they shot the grindings over the property line to the adjacent houses. It was on the roof. It was mind-boggling. How could you do this? And we're not talking sawdust. We're talking chunks of wood like so. They're between 3 and 4 inches of chipped wood. We made sure that that contractor is responsive to that homeowner. What are you doing to fix the problem? We have the ability to issue stop work orders. So that's one of the ways to compel compliance. You might not get a ticket for a citation for shooting that road. I don't have a code section that says, here's your citation for shooting wood onto a roof. But I can issue a stop work order and says, until this is cleaned up and made right, you can't do anything else. We can make sure that if erosion control measures aren't installed correctly, that nothing else can go on until that's fixed, because that's what's protecting the public health and safety. In some instances, and here's one where if something has been constructed according to plan, and now I'm speaking specifically of city projects, if it's been constructed according to plan and it's not right, I probably have to pay that contractor to make it right. So that's a third alternative on what happens. So what else can I answer?
Every day you hear in Atlanta about a water line blowing up or a sewer breaking and the road collapsing. And I think maybe some of this stuff is over 100 years old. How long is this stuff supposed to last? how is Atlanta ever going to repair all this stuff?
That's a good question. Depends on the pipe material that went in. So the stuff that you're talking about that's 100 years old, there's our what? Iron pipes, it was before ductile iron pipes, so cast iron pipes. In some instances for sewer, it's clay pipes. There's a number of ways that can be fixed or remedied. Not all mean replacing the pipe. City of Smyrna currently is going through and doing CIPP, which is cast in place, cured in place, excuse me, not cast in place, cured in place, which is a felt sock that's impregnated with resin. And they inflate this into the pipe and then pressurize it with water and then heat that water. And that cures the resin. Then they go through with a laser cutter, because they have cambered the line ahead of time. They know where the pipes come in, and they use a laser cutter to cut out that coupon of now the cured resin impregnated felt so that the pipes still access. So the answer is ductile iron pipes, cast iron pipes, average lifespan I think is 50 years. But if one of the pipe contractors could probably tell me, pipe salesman could say, no, it lasts longer than that. PVC pipe and HDPE pipe last significantly longer, but they're not as structurally rigid. When they're replacing a sewer with a larger sewer, they actually have a technique called pipe bursting, where you take a bullet-shaped mandrel and drag it through the pipe, and it usually has fins on the front. So it causes that pipe to break, to crack, and you're pulling this through and you're compacting the earth around it while you're pulling this through or driving it through hydraulically, and then you drive a new pipe into the void you've just created. So there are some ways of doing it without necessarily tearing things up, but aging infrastructure is a big issue. Pipes, water lines, ensuring that when they go in the ground, they're inspected properly. That during construction activities, they're not damaged after the fact. There's a gas line explosion in Alabama 7 or 8 years ago, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was determined that the pipe was nicked during construction, and then they backfilled it. And it was just a small nick, it's a bump, it's nothing you would have thought to see, but over time, corrosion caused that to go great, to corrode and fail. And so now you filled this void, the void space in the dirt, with this gas. Blew up in something like a 130-foot wide crater. I forget what it was. But to your point, infrastructure is aging, and what was put in was not necessarily documented and has not necessarily been managed. And that's not just Atlanta, it's not just Smyrna, that's across the country. It takes a lot of money to make sure we're monitoring what's going on with our infrastructure. Same thing with roads. Pavements can last useful pavement life 15, 18, 20 years. If you let it go too long, you're now doing a full depth repair on that pavement. If you're just milling off the surface in a timely manner, you can get ahead of that, but it's still expensive. I think we do 4 miles of resurfacing on an annual basis at a cost of about $1 million. So it varies, it depends on the road, it depends on the width, but that's approximately what we're doing. We need to step that up. We're falling behind on the pace. Any other questions? Is there anything from online? Okay.
On the topic of traffic
calming.
Yes.
First of all, when a subdivision comes to you and says, hey, listen, we need to slow traffic down, what kinds of things, tools do you have in your bag of tricks? And then second, who is ultimately responsible for that? If you comply or if you satisfy their needs and something goes wrong, who's responsible? Is it the city as a whole responsible for whatever happens, or is it that subdivision that requested it?
The second question is easier to answer. If it's in the right of way, the city is responsible. That's why we do or don't do certain procedures. If it's a 35-mile-an-hour road, speed humps are designed to slow cars down to 25 miles an hour. And Smyrna has a policy that they go on roads with a 25-mile-an-hour less speed limit. If we put them on a 35-mile-an-hour or a 45-mile-an-hour road, there are potential consequences with that. There's potential liability. It works great to slow the car down, but if you've told somebody it's safe to go 35 and you hit this, there's potential liability for the city. To the first part of the question, first thing I do when somebody asks, can we get a traffic calming measure installed, whatever that is, first thing I do is I take data. We have radar signs that collect driver speed, and we post those. We do not display the speed for the initial phase because I want unadulterated data. I want something that hasn't influenced the driver. So I put the sign up, it says here's what your speed limit is, and it's got the radar sign, and then I get phone calls that say it's not working. It's not, we're taking data. We're seeing what is the speed on the roadway without affecting driver behavior. Then we turn the display on, and we have it set so that it'll display in solid numbers up to the speed limit. Above the speed limit by 5 or 10 miles an hour, it will flash. And more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, it displays the word slow down. I don't want to get caught up in the high score. Hey, look, I did 88 on a 25 zone. It happens. So based on that data, if the 85th percentile speed is at least 10 miles an hour above the speed limit or more, then yes, that road is eligible for traffic calming, like a speed hump. Other things we do is textured pavement, rumble strips. You have to be aware of that you can't be within about 100 or 200 feet of houses because that's invasive, that's annoying for folks. Excuse me. There's chokers, so you actually build a curb that cuts it into either side to create that. We've done stuff with paint, where we've painted the center line where it is, but you bring the white line in, the fog line or the edge of pavement line, bring that in closer. So instead of a 10 or 11 or 12 foot lane, you give them a 9-foot lane or an 8.5-foot lane. And because of the standards that we use for roadways, you can go anywhere in the country and you know that a yellow line means don't cross, there's traffic the other direction. The white line is the edge of the pavement. So even if you're not conscious that this is a narrower lane, people slow down and try to keep in between. It's an automatic thing. So signage works. City of Smyrna won't let me put up the sign I want to put up. Caution, nude sunbathing ahead. But we do put up signs, just straight up signs with the children playing, slow children playing. Those kinds of signs aren't really effective, but putting up neighborhood-specific signs to address whatever the issue is. Limited sight distance, multiple driveways, things like that. So there's a couple of things that we can do. Anything else?
In Europe, I've seen serpentine slowing.
Yes, I'm actually one of the roads in.
I wasn't on mic, so.
So the comment was serpentine roads or chicanes. That's a great way. You getting your driver offline, and one of the roads in Smyrna, one of the streets in Smyrna, the older part of Smyrna, has stretches where there are no driveways coming out, that they're rear driveway, and so you've got one driveway. You're not going to create a lot of conflict with that. So I can move everybody over for a stretch. It's not as sharp a chicane as I've seen in Europe, as you see on Formula One racing. It's not that tight, but still, if I can narrow the lanes and pull people offline, make them focus a little bit more, again, within confines of roadway design standards, I can't create a hazard within the right-of-way that assigns liability to the city. At one point in the city of Decatur, I saw them do a lane choker with big concrete planters out in the roadway. I don't know who would think that that's a good idea. Because yes, you can't go through the planter, but heaven forbid somebody hits that at speed and there's an injury or fatality. Or even if you just scratch your car, that's the city's fault. You couldn't expect that there. So, roundabouts? Yes. I like roundabouts. Roundabouts are great at maintaining flow through an area, but slowing it down. The big problem with roundabouts is they're expensive. Even the mini roundabouts, which go within the right-of-way. Roswell installed one on North Thompson. Not North Thompson, I forget. So, City of Roswell installed one. I want to say the cost was about $650,000. That's not cheap. I can put up a lot of signs and paint a lot of paint for $650,000. So, but that's not to say we don't do one. We put a big one in at a 6-point intersection. They called it 5 points. I don't know why. It's 6 points, but they call it 5 points. That roundabout project, which was full size and required some right-of-way acquisition, I want to say came in about $1.6 million. So roundabouts are great for the permanent built environment, but they're expensive, and you've got to get support from elected officials and from the community in order to justify that expense. So what else can I answer? Bridges. We don't use bridges for traffic calming. Sorry. We don't, there's not much that I'll do directly with a bridge. I'm not a structural engineer. We have some bridges going in. We refer to consultants for that and design specialists for that. And our building department will inspect the structures that are going in for that. Those are permitted separately. Are they? Yeah, they gotta be. But that's where our partners with Cobb County DOT and with Georgia DOT. If I've got a bridge going in and I don't know what I'm looking at, I'm gonna bring in somebody else from one of these other organizations or get their direct reference. Who should I handle to do construction inspection and to do regular bridge inspection? I do believe Georgia DOT does a bridge inspection program throughout the region, and they inform the local municipalities or the counties what the results of that bridge inspection are, and then it's up to the cities to fund the remediation work, the maintenance work, or the replacement of that. So, anything else? Sir?
Yeah, it's kind of a comment and a question in regards to maybe you have some opinion or feedback on, but in traffic calming trends, the city of Sandy Springs, for example, in their downtown area, what they've been doing is...
So you're saying City of Sandy Springs traffic calming?
Traffic calming trends. There is a move afoot now to narrow lanes to slow traffic down. But in the process of doing it, there's an example in Sandy Springs, on Sandy Springs Circle near the new downtown government complex. And it's a fairly heavily traveled road where what they've done is they took away one of the lanes. There used to be 2 lanes in each direction. They took one of those travel lanes, converted it to parallel parking, which was great. But what they did was they did curb bulb outs at the driveways. So when you're making a right-hand turn, you've got no sight line to tell you that there's a curb there. And there's a lot of people hitting their wheels, and you know, now the newer cars all have those low-profile tires. So you're tearing up a $200 wheel, trying to take a right-hand turn out into traffic in a narrow lane, which in order to, once you do that one time, you're going to take wide right turns, and it puts you in oncoming traffic to make the turn. Is there any experience in other, like in Smyrna, with that type of a lane narrowing happening? And are there any things that could be done to improve the visibility to the drivers so that they can properly navigate the turn?
Couple of points to touch on there. When I'm looking at traffic calming solutions, I really am looking at what's appropriate for any particular circumstance. We have about a 3/4 mile stretch of Concord Road that we're looking at doing medians on. And so there's something similar there with that, but we've made sure that we're not creating an encumbered lane, a narrow lane, with any driveway entrances. We located these between roads and between driveways. I'm also putting on the leading edge of the medians, and I would imagine that's something that could have been done as well, is a mountable curb section. I saw those go in the Marietta Square, where they did those bulb outs, but in particular to protect parallel parking, and at the driveway entrances in between, they've tapered the turn back, and they've got a very pronounced taper on the curb, so that if a vehicle tire does hit it, it'll drive over it.
Right, conventional curb and gutter is the problem.
Yes.
It's an 8-inch curb or 6-inch curb.
Yep.
That's the move.
Doing anything for signing that actually creates something else for the car to hit. If I put a sign right there that says, there's a curb here, the car is going to be sweeping and it's going to take the sign out and scratch the car and so on. So, good question. Anything else?
Thank you. Good answer.
Thank you.
You don't have to worry about snow.
Don't have to worry about snow. But it's interesting you mentioned that. I will digress real briefly. By intent, during inclement weather, the city does spread brine, but when it starts getting too much colder and the brine is no longer effective, and the roads freeze, we don't spread salt. Salt requires a whole level of permitting with EPD. Brine is such a dilute solution, there is a permit for that, but we just spread sand. We spread sand to add grit, and then there's particular streets they'll hit during an emergency. When a snow emergency is forecast, our Public Works Department goes to what they call the AB shift, where there's 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and they switch off. And there are particular areas we know, such as bridges and steep roads, that we will hit first. So we anticipate that. Yes, sir. Another question.
All right, folks, thank you. Join
Thanks.
me, please, in giving Eric a
Well, thank you
round
kindly.
of applause. Eric, and on behalf of the Atlanta Metro Chapter of GSPE, please accept this small token of our appreciation for spending the evening here with us.
Thank you kindly. I appreciate it greatly. Thank you for having me.
Good evening, everyone.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation given at one of the Atlanta Metro Chapter meetings of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. To find out more about us or to join us, check us out at gspe.org.